All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share the final project document. And let me just make sure I grab the right one. Here we go. So Eco 201 final paper guide. Actually, you know what? Let's go to the final project document, because you guys in 201 have actually you guys have actually done everything. So you don't have anything new to add to your paper. So all the work that you are going to be doing this week, and hopefully you've already started, has to do with making edits to what you've already done, or filling in any gaps that you might have missed and didn't realize when you did your milestone submission. But the milestones did cover the paper in its entirety. So you do have that going for you. So if you did well on your milestones, in the sense that you completed all the elements and maybe just have some tweaks here and there to do, you're in really good shape for the final. If you missed any elements from your milestone, your instructor would have let you know. Maybe you got a not evident, I think that's the technical term in the rubric for it. If you missed a section, then you know that you missed it from your milestone, and you can go back and add that in. But really, most of the work is done. So what I'm going to do, because most of the work is done, I want to go to the rubric and talk about this a little bit, since that's really going to be the focus of your editing for the final paper. So you'll notice that, and I've talked about this a little bit before, so if you were here for past webinars, or if you've watched the videos, that you are always encouraged to look at the final project rubric, even though the milestones use a less strict rubric. So you'll notice that we have 4 proficiency levels now, whereas we used to just have 3. The 4 proficiency levels are exemplary, which is now the 100% level, proficient, which is what on the milestone was the 100% level, needs improvement, and not evident. So like I mentioned a lot, the milestones are treated in terms of how they're graded as rough drafts. So if you're at the proficient level for your milestone, then that gets you full credit, because it's graded as a rough draft in that sense. But that same level of work becomes a B on your final paper, because the expectation is that you will fine tune anything that's at the proficient level to try and get it to that exemplary level for the final paper, because you do have the benefit of the feedback from your instructor, and of course you have the benefit of having now gone through almost the entire course. So you're in a position now where you can make a lot of these improvements. So the important thing I want you guys to look out for is the difference between exemplary and proficient. Now, some of you might have been below proficient on certain elements in your milestones, which is absolutely fine. That's why we have the milestones. But because the exemplary column wasn't there in your feedback, I really want you to understand what it's going to take if you were at the proficient, or if you're at the needs improvement and you want to get all the way to exemplary, what you need to do to get there. Because when you go back and when you read your feedback in the rubrics from your instructors, you won't be able to read this exemplary column. So what I think would be really helpful for you guys is to have this. Maybe you have it printed out, maybe you just have it open on the screen on your computer, and you toggle back and forth between this, your final project rubric, and the feedback and the score that you got on each element from each of your milestones. And you just go through, read your feedback, see your score, and compare it to what it's going to take to improve your score here. And that's how you can really work out making those additions. So between this rubric and your instructor feedback, that should put you on a track to make some tweaks and to improve your score. All right, so some of them are pretty straightforward, and some of them you'll probably be in a good position no matter what. And we don't really need to review here. I'm not going to review every single rubric element for all 15 of these. But there are a handful that I want to point out, because they're kind of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and I want to make sure that at the very least you tackle those that are very straightforward, and so you can get those points straight away, and then you can spend a little bit more time with your research and with your feedback from your instructor and the others. So the first one is actually the purpose statement. So the introduction to your paper has two parts. You let the reader know why you're writing the paper. So what's the purpose of your paper? So it's, similar to what we might say a thesis statement. So the purpose of your paper, of course, is you're going to analyze a company using microeconomic principles and concepts and data to give them some recommendations going forward. Now, at the beginning, when you wrote this in Milestone 1, you did not know what your recommendations were going to be. But now that you're at the final, you've written the whole paper, you've written some recommendations, now you know what they are. So the expectation is that you can go from proficient to exemplary, or from needs improvement to exemplary, now that you've got your whole paper fleshed out. You can add in, so you'll notice that the exemplary column for introduction purpose says to be proficient and use industry-specific language to establish expertise. That might have been really difficult on Milestone 1 because you hadn't done all your research yet, and you might not have had that expertise. But now that you've gone through this whole paper, and from what I see from my students, they definitely do. You become, kind of like an expert in the market that your company operates in. So this is a great chance to go in and add in some specifics and bring in some of that industry-specific language to establish that expertise and earn full credit there. What I noticed that on Milestones a lot of students do is their purpose statement is very basic, which is what we tell you to do if you're unsure how to start. So they might say, this is the company that I'm doing, and this is the stuff I'm going to analyze. That's it. And if the person didn't know the company, they might not even know what business this company was in, because a lot of times students don't go into that level of detail on their milestone. Again, now that you've got your whole paper written, now you can go into that level of detail here. So it's not going to be hugely long, but you might add a couple sentences or two to bring in your new knowledge and flesh out your overall purpose of the paper a little bit more. All right, so another one that I want to point out, a couple that have a similar theme, is using research to illustrate your claims. So there's a couple here, two in the price elasticity of demand section. So price elasticity of demand analyze and price elasticity of demand pricing decisions that reference using research to illustrate your claims. So a lot of what we do in this course is based on, like I mentioned, the macroeconomic principles. Price elasticity of demand is certainly one of them, that are based in these theoretical models that are simplified versions of what we see in the real world in terms of consumer behavior and firm behavior. But it's really nice for you as students of this to kind of connect the dots between the theory. Okay, what does the theory of price elasticity of demand say in the real world? What does the actual data and evidence say? Or what does research done by economists say? So that's really where we want you to take that next level step. So a couple of these where you see that in the exemplary column, that's really what it's looking for you to do. So you might be able to explain how the theory connects with your company based on what you know about, for instance, the determinants of price elasticity of demand. But if you can bring in some research using empirical data, or like I said, research done by economists, or even things just shared by industry experts that you can find in a newspaper article, all of that can count as bringing in research to illustrate those claims. So you're supporting the theory with real evidence from the real world. So we really want this that to be the way that this paper could be more relevant for you all, so you really see how all these theories and things that you're learning, all these models, really do show themselves in what we really see firms and people doing in their everyday actions in the economy. So those are some things to keep an eye out for. And then there's a couple others in the overall market that, for me, again, I think this is like a low-hanging fruit, so I really like to point it out to students, is the overall market. So the overall market has a couple that really, it's to go from proficient to exemplary. often it's very clear, but I think some students just forget to make the additions. And before I get to that, I see some questions about, Steph asked, does industry specific mean the terms we learned this semester and while writing this paper? So Stephanie, that would refer to any things that have to do with that industry in and of itself. So if you're writing your paper about Netflix, you would be mentioning things about video on demand service and maybe trends, cable cutting, cord cutting, or maybe you might be mentioning original content, things like that. Things that are specific to the Netflix industry would be brought up when you're getting into more specifics about the purpose of your paper. So you might say, the purpose of my paper is to make a recommendation for Netflix. Okay, but then take that one step further. My analysis will support my recommendation that they create more of their own content, for instance, because video on demand is becoming more popular and people want more options in terms of content that they watch. So all those things that I'm saying are specific to the Netflix business. I couldn't say that about Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, it would sound very different. I might be talking about healthy lifestyle choices. If I were talking about recommendations for that and the purpose of my paper investigating those things. So that's kind of, I guess, what we mean when we say industry-specific language. Perfect, great. So overall market. So if we look at the first one here, I'll just put it right to the top. Overall market share. To go from proficient to exemplary, you need to present the data graphically and over time. So when we talk about the market share, hopefully by now, after your third milestone, you're comfortable with this. It's just kind of the piece of the pie given in a percentage that each company has of the overall market. So if we were to talk about Coca-Cola and we were just looking at the market for soda or carbonated drinks, we'd say, maybe they have, I'm throwing out a number, 40% of all soft drinks sold are Coca-Cola products. That would be their market share. And maybe Pepsi's is like 35%, just to throw out a number. And the rest is smaller, divided up by smaller companies. That would be the start for the proficient level. To go to the exemplary level, you need to show that data graphically. So again, that's very straightforward. If you've already shared the data for the proficient level, all you need to do is take that same data and put it in a graph. I mean, a pie chart obviously makes the most sense, but it doesn't have to be a pie chart. But then also show it over time. So that you can just get 2 years of data at the very least to show it over time. I mean, the more you can get, the better. Sometimes you're only able to find reliable data for 2, depending on the industry that you've got. But if you can get it for at least 2 years, that allows you to show the movement of it. So did your company get a bigger slice of the pie between that period of time, or did their slice of the pie get smaller? So that's really the reason we want to bring that in, because that's going to help you make your recommendation stronger. All right, and then the barriers to entry one, I see some questions from Nadine about that. I'm going to specifically talk, Nadine, for a moment about the rubric, and that might answer some of your questions, but it looks like Kate and others are addressing the specifics that you have. So the barriers to entry one, this is another example where I think students tend to do a pretty good job of hitting the proficient level, and it would be an easy jump to get to exemplary, but I think some students just forget to do it. So this is my chance to remind you guys. So if you're at the proficient level, you're analyzing barriers to entry in your market for the potential for new competition to come in. So not your own company's barriers, but companies that might come in and give them some competition, and its impact for your company's future in the market. So let's say you've done that and you want to get to the exemplary level. The exemplary level, all you need to do is provide an example or examples of a successful or failed entrant into that market. So that's just providing some detail. So you might say, oh, the barriers to entry are very low for this industry. So if the barriers to entry are very low, you know, it's very easy to break in. There's no cost to exit the market. There's no regulatory requirements. There's no legal requirements. You can sort of just jump in and do it, like a house cleaning business, you know, something very easy like that. We would expect to see new entrants coming into the market all the time. So you would want to show an example of that to get yourself to the exemplary level. On the other hand, if the barriers to entry are high, you might want to share a story of a failed entrant. Even when barriers are high, there are still successful entrants. So in that case, you might still have a successful example you want to share. But the point is that, again, we want to give you a chance to bring in some real world examples to go along with just talking about the concepts in a more theoretical way. All right, so hopefully that addressed some of the questions. And Charlton, it looks like Steve got your question. So yes, that's exactly what barriers means. So anything that prevents a company from coming into a new market. So like a very basic one might be even like a hair salon. A lot of hair salons, you know, you need to be licensed to do some of that stuff. So that's one barrier to entry when there's an occupation has a licensing requirement. So there's lots of occupations like that. Other barriers are things like, you know, capital costs to start up. And of course, there's legal barriers like patents or exclusive rights to things in terms of land or access. So if you wanted to start an oil company, you would need access to land to drill for oil. So you couldn't just necessarily just start an oil company the way that you could start, you know, a software company necessarily. They both have high capital costs, but one has another kind of barrier to it. And the book details all of the different barriers to entry. It goes through each of them. So if you're unsure about it, you can read through each one. They're bulleted in our textbook. And you can just think about how that applies to your industry. Oh, for this one, that's not really a thing for my industry. So that wouldn't be one. That would be low or non-existent. And then some other barriers, you know, would be an issue for your industry. All right. And lastly, one I want to really highlight is articulation of response. A lot of students do need some additional assistance with APA formatting. Hopefully by this point your APA formatting is okay in terms of citations, in-text citations and references. But if your instructor's given you any feedback about sharpening that, now's the time to make sure all that stuff is sorted out. We have a lot of tools here at SNU to help you with that. We have the Online Writing Center and other resources at the Shapiro Library that can help you with citation management. So please don't let that be the thing that keeps you up late at night. You know, if that's something you need assistance with, that's what they're there for. You should have your abstract in by this point. Now you can fill out your abstract, your title page, and your running head. Those are just some of the basics of having your paper generally formatted in an APA style. So do be sure to check that out and just make sure that your reference page does have everything combined. I know that we've been working on separate milestones and perhaps some of you had your reference list spread out. So just make sure that everything comes together and is in alphabetical order to stay in APA format. So that's an easy one that I would, you know, I always hate to see students lose points on that because, you know, it's definitely something we've got a lot of tools to help you out with. Now in the recommendation section, students, again, this is an area where students, at least in, you know, from what I've seen in my own courses and in other courses, tend to do pretty well here, even on reaching exemplary. But the main thing that all of these exemplary descriptors for in the recommendation section are looking for are that you are pulling in information that you've touched on throughout the paper. So you're not just bringing in a totally new idea that isn't related to your analysis, because we want all of your recommendations and all of your insights here in the recommendation section to be supported by your earlier analysis. Otherwise, the analysis was really for nothing. So really that's the point of this kind of paper, is you're using these microeconomic concepts and models to inform these conclusions that you're making about what your company ought to do going forward. So you notice that in the first recommendation section, to be exemplary, it says you relate the recommendation to the economic principles presented in the paper. So that's there, right off the bat. And then in the second one, it provides advice for how to strengthen its position in the market. So of course, you have to have clearly stated where their position in the market is. And that's why it really helps in that overall market share element to understand where the firm is heading. Are they getting a bigger piece of the pie, or have they been getting a smaller piece of the pie? If you know that, if you found that information and you include it in your paper, that's really going to help you on this section. And then the very last one in the recommendation, to be exemplary, it says to be proficient and then provide specific ideas for how the firm can sustain its success. So again, these ideas should, they're going to be brand new ideas. You weren't necessarily sharing ideas throughout the paper for how they should going forward respond to changes in demand and in their pricing strategies. But what you recommend, what the specific ideas are, should be related to what you talked about in the demand section. So like the Coca-Cola example, if you weren't talking about trends with healthy eating, then it wouldn't really make sense for you to give a specific idea related to healthy options. If you did talk about demand for more healthy options, then it would make a whole lot of sense for you to talk about ideas specific to that here. So just make sure that those things match up. That's one of the main things that we're looking for, because again, we really want you to be able to take these tools and give them a practical application. All right, well that is, those are really the main ones I wanted to point out. Again, we don't have time to go through every single one in detail, but I hope this gave you a little bit of insight in how you can really strengthen up your paper. I don't want you to get too overwhelmed. We do not expect every paper to be perfect on every single element, but what you can do, what I would do if I were in your shoes, is I would look at the ones where I feel like I can make the most impact. So again, this is one of the things we study in economics is, how you can improve at the margin, right? If you want to increase your grade X number of points, where can you make the most impact? Maybe you can pick a few elements where you feel comfortable that you can really do a really good job on those and knock it out of the park, and really tighten those up and get those to be exemplary. And maybe you're not going to be able to improve every single element based on the feedback you got from your instructor. If that's how you feel coming into this, that you don't have time to work on improving every single one, then by all means, you do what's right for you. But because we have this rubric here for you, you can kind of go through it and see how you want to approach it. Ideally, you can look through each of these and make some tweaks, but I understand that, I was a student once too, that, that's not always possible. So I do want you to be thoughtful and maybe even a little bit strategic about how you approach this. So you can, put your best effort forward without, going too crazy. I know that this paper's been a lot of work, and you've all put a lot of time into it. So don't anyone break themselves here in week 7. All right, I don't see any other questions in the chat. It looks like my helpers, my fellow professors here, are doing an awesome job keeping up with the questions, so thank you guys. But if we don't have any more questions, I'll let you guys keep posting. But otherwise, we will make the pivot over to Eco 202 students. Oh, a couple of raised hands. So Arena and Melora, if you can just type your questions, that would be okay. Are you able to go over the abstract? Oh, sure. I'm sorry that I missed that, Melora. And Arena, if you have a question, feel free to just type it in. So if the abstract doesn't have a rubric element, Melora. So that's included in the articulation of response. So let me pull up, since we have a few minutes left here. Let me pull up the final paper guide. Make sure I get the right one for you guys. Oh, thank you, Arena. That was very thoughtful. Okay, so here's, you've probably already seen this, a blurb about the abstract. It's, again, like it says, it's just a basic summary of your paper. It might sound pretty similar to your introduction. It's not going to be written the same way that an introduction is written. When we write an introduction, we want it to be maybe a little bit catchy, and it's always going to end with your sort of main thesis statement when you write an introduction to the paper. But the abstract, excuse me, is just going to give, like it says, a summary of the paper, the main things that you're going to do. This is what you share with people when you write an academic type of paper, so that they know, do I want to read this paper or not? What are the main things it's going to talk about? So they get a sense of, is it the topic of the thing that I'm looking for, before they get into reading a whole long paper. So really, that's the purpose of an abstract. Right, so an abstract, you'll notice here it's on its own page. So like if you were, and you guys might notice this when you go to the Shapiro Library, if you're, in your research, you're pulling up, you find like an academic paper, it might say like who wrote it, the title, how long it is, and then it will give you the abstract. And the abstract basically is just a very quick summary about what the paper is about. And then you use that to decide, is this the resource that I'm looking for? Am I looking for a paper about Netflix's, business recommendations based on microeconomic principles? Is that what I'm looking for? And if it is what you're looking for, then you open up the paper. Right. So usually, for my students, like Steve mentioned, I just have them leave a spot for the abstract. I don't really want them to be writing it at the beginning because there's nothing to write. Like in milestone 1, 2, maybe by 3 you've finished your paper and you can write it. But even then, but you're not getting a grade just on the abstract. Again, it's part of the articulation of response. So we want to make sure that it's coherent. There's no grammar or spelling mistakes, and that it's there. And it's going to be on its own page. So you've got your title page, then you've got your abstract, and then you go into your introduction. You've got your title of your paper, and then history of the company, so on and so forth. All right, well, now we really are at 9 o'clock. So thank you guys all so much. I really hope that this was helpful for you all, and that everyone is feeling good and feeling like you got this and you're ready to make those edits and those changes that you need to hit the goal that you're hoping for with this paper. And if you have any questions, like I always say, please email your instructor as soon as possible. The earlier you email them, the earlier they can respond to you, and then that gives you more time to get the work done. All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring up our Eco 202 stuff. To our Eco 202 students just joining, welcome. We do have some new stuff to go over, so I'm going to make sure that we go through that, and then we can talk a little bit about the project overall. All right, scroll way up to the top. Okay, so Before I get into the new elements for Eco 202, there are 4 new elements. So expect to add, if you haven't begun this already for 202 students, expect to add 4 slides to what you've already got between your 3 milestones. This is what your presentation, your PowerPoint presentation should look like when you've put it all together. So I'm going to go through this just so you get a sense of how things are organized. Basically, it's organized the exact same way that it's organized on the rubric for the final paper. I mean, for the final project rubric. So you'll have your title slide, and then the overview. Oops, sorry there. And then the overview, which isn't directly aligned to a rubric element, but does inform the next ones. And then you'll recognize the stuff from milestone 1. GDP, probably a couple slides. And then unemployment inflation, again, probably a couple slides. And then interest rates, 1 or 2 slides. And then here's where the first new slide comes in that you're going to add for the final project. And that's foreign trade and exports. So I'm going to come back to this. I want to go through the whole thing just so you guys can see what it looks like, and then we'll come back to this one in particular. So foreign trade and exports is new for the final, and foreign trade models is new for the final. Since we just went over foreign trade in week 6, obviously we weren't able to include that for any of the milestones, so it is here. And then you'll recognize from milestone 2, fiscal policy actions, and fiscal policy impact. And then for milestone 3, monetary policy. Oops, that one is duplicated. Sorry about that. Hopefully it's not in your class. Monetary policy actions and monetary policy impact. And then, again, this is where the last 2 of the 4 new ones come in. Conclusions and agree and disagree slide. So these are these last 2 are 2 of the 4 new ones that you're adding for the final. So Rebecca asks if this is due Sunday or next Tuesday. It is due Sunday. So the term ends Tuesday of week 9, but this paper or this project is due Sunday of week 7. Yep. And then of course your reference slides. It might be more, you might need more than 1 slide. So this is how your paper, I keep saying paper, I'm sorry, it's because I was just with 201. Your project should be organized like this. If it's out of order, it's not such a big deal, but it makes the flow of the project overall more coherent to be set up this way, and it makes it easier for your instructor to grade it accurately if everything's in the right order and where it should be, and make sure that they don't miss anything and that you don't miss out on any hard-earned points, which I certainly don't want to have happen. So if we go back up to foreign trade, imports and exports, so this comes right after interest rates when you put it all together. And again, the reason that this is in this section is because although we didn't do it in our first data collection in milestone 1 because we hadn't talked about it yet, it is part of all that data collection, so we do want it to be included here. So for this element, you're going to provide data on the levels of imports and exports throughout your decade. So, there's a couple ways you can do this. Some students look at it as a percentage of GDP. Some students just look at it as in dollar terms. If you do it in dollar terms, make sure that you do it in inflation adjusted real dollars, if that's what you're going for. There are definitely some decades where inflation does play a big role, so we want to correct for that. And then I would definitely encourage you to look at imports and exports individually instead of just looking at the net of the 2, so you can see how each of them is moving. Maybe they're both moving up over your time period, but one is moving up faster than the other. So you'd sort of want to understand that. If you just look at the net, you'll sort of lose some of that movement that you see in each of them. So, and then once you've presented the data, You're going to make connections to other aspects of the economy, such as the exchange rate. So you might want to, and you could certainly include a graph of the exchange rate. It's not required the way that presenting the data on imports and exports is, but you could find some information on the exchange rates during those times and talk about that, how that might have played a role in the level of imports and exports and how they changed during the 10-year time period. And then, as we have before, we've got some import and export data links here. This links to, I believe it's Trading Economics website. Correct, somebody I'm sure knows the exact what it's called. But the data that this website uses is from the Census Bureau. So the Census Bureau is the primary source for this information. So if you go here, you can find it. But if you're not able to pull the data right from the site, I know some students run into some trouble with that. You can go to the Census Bureau directly as well. All right, and then the next slide for foreign trade kind of picks up where the other one left off. So you're going to relate the trade levels to events within the economy and within the trading partners' economies. So in an example that we share here, during the Great Recession, we saw incomes decrease in most of the Western world, so in the United States and a lot of Western Europe, Japan, although they're not technically Western world, but they're a major trading partner of ours. So we know that demand for imports is determined by income, and so when nations' incomes go down so drastically across the board, you're going to see a lot less exports and imports. So we cannot sell as much to our trading partners because they have less money to spend. And we also can't import as much because we've got less money to spend on their stuff. So you would see that effect, for example, in our infamous aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. And then you can also use this space to consider any relevant trade agreements during this time. And I know a lot of you explored that in your discussion board post in week 6. So that's kind of a way you can take advantage of some of that research that you already did and include that here. And you can also talk about how that might match up with, other models, like we talk about the comparative advantage concept. So that's something you could bring in here too, related to trade agreements, or just something you want to talk about, separately. Maybe there's, a trading partner of ours developed a great comparative advantage in a specific industry, and we see that playing out in the import and export data, kind of like with China and their boom in manufacturing of consumer products. That might be something that you talk about. They've got this comparative advantage in that, and then once they were able to boost their production, we had a lot more imports from them. So that's something you could certainly talk about and show your instructor that you understand that concept and are bringing it into your project. So Jonathan asks, while we're here, can we briefly discuss the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model and how to apply it to the section? Absolutely. So the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, in this case, it's mostly going to play out on the aggregate demand side, because aggregate demand is basically the GDP formula. So the GDP formula is, consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. So changes to the level of imports and exports are going to impact they're going to impact aggregate demand. So you might see a shift, like in this one, where we have fewer exports and fewer imports all around. We see the aggregate demand would shift inward. In that case, since demand all around was down. But there might be a case where we are exporting a lot more, and maybe there was a certain time period where that occurred, based on some sort of trade agreement perhaps, or lowering of tariffs, and that was, the lowering of those tariffs was allowed the economy to grow and to take advantage of increased trade. And then the aggregate demand curve would shift out in that instance. So that's one example. You don't have to use the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model here. That's just one example. You do have to, we do want you to talk about, again, some of the models, but that's one. Again, you can talk about comparative advantage. That's another one that would fit in really well here if you don't want to go back to the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, which I know we did a lot for fiscal policy and monetary policy. I hope that answers your question, Jonathan. You're welcome. And also, it's, I don't want to, you would have to make sure that you've got the information and data to back you up, but you could present an argument where the aggregate supply side is impacted by trade, because if you think about the comparative advantage side of things, it allows economies to focus on what they do best, which should make them more efficient and decrease their costs in a way. So there is an argument that it could help lower costs through on the aggregate supply side. So that might be an argument you could make if you want to go down that road. It might be a little bit tougher to support for you all at this level. I know this is an intro to macroeconomics class, so I don't want to give you like this Herculean task, but yeah, that's also a perspective you could take. So throwing it out there. All right, so we've gone through the rest. You're going to come after you do those fiscal, after you've got your foreign trade, your 2 slides on foreign trade here, and then those are going to be between interest rates and fiscal policy, and then all the way down to the end, after you finish up monetary policy, you're going to introduce your 2 new slides, the last 2 new slides, which are your conclusion slides. So now that you've done everything, you've done all the milestones, you've added the foreign policy bit, the foreign trade bit, now you can do your conclusion. So the conclusion here is you're going to sort of summarize and synthesize the data, the history, and the policy analysis that you've presented in kind of a just a coherent, thorough manner, as it says. So this is your time to tell the story of the decade and make any connections that your analysis has led you to conclude. And be sure to include specific examples and data points that help tell the story. So again, we talk about this a lot in the webinars. You don't want to have too much text on your slide. So in this case, like I've mentioned a lot of students will just bullet point a few things. You might want to make, some students have done sort of, I don't want to say a table, but just to break up the text, maybe made like a few text boxes to talk about the major things that happened. Every decade's going to be a little bit different. I know some of you might have had time periods where fiscal policy was a much bigger part of the economic story than maybe monetary policy was. So you probably would focus more on that here in your conclusions. For others of you, it might be the opposite. Maybe monetary policy was the bigger story than fiscal policy. And of course, the actual events and data points that happened. You'll want to highlight specific recessions that happened during your 10-year time period, or any booms, economic booms that happened, times of economic expansion that you'll want to note. And of course, major swings in inflation and unemployment. You'll want to kind of reiterate those here. And really just tie all the pieces together and make your one last statement about what you found out about your time period in terms of the aggregate economy. And then, so do make sure, even on this slide, you've got the basics on the slide itself. Like I said, you can bullet it, you can just block out the text so it's in separate sections and not just one big paragraph. But then you'll still have a more detailed paragraph in the notes area of the slide. just like is always required. And then the agree, disagree. This is the very last slide of content where you're going to talk about any of the policy actions that you presented and whether you agreed or disagreed with them and why. And the why really does need to use some macroeconomic reasoning, not just that, you think that that's a lousy idea, but that it was a bad idea because, the example that we use here, it created inflation. The policy that they put in created inflation, and that's undesirable. Or the policy wasn't big enough and unemployment didn't come down fast enough, something like that. Or you agreed with it because it helped get the economy out of a recession. Or you agreed with it, with the policies, because there was economic expansion during this time period. So things were going well. Those are the sorts of things that we want you to say. It just has to be based in some sort of macroeconomic justification. So Jennifer asks, conclusion comes after monetary policy. Yes, that's correct. So monetary policy was your third milestone. So that was the last thing that you did. You're going to throw the 2 foreign trade slides are going to go right after interest rates, and then the conclusion and agree, disagree come right after monetary policy. So there it is. Yep. So now on the agree, disagree slide, usually students address a couple of the policies separately. You don't have to feel the same way about all the policies that you talked about. Maybe some you agreed with and some you didn't agree with, and you can address those separately and then detail your reasons in the notes area. Yeah, Melissa. Melissa asks if would increased government deficit be an example of disagree? Yep, and if you really wanted to show your instructor that you know your stuff, you would explain why you think deficits are a bad idea using a macroeconomic based reason. I know that that's a very hot topic with people, especially laymen. Oh, deficits are bad, and there are reasons why deficits can be bad. So there are macroeconomic reasons why big deficits at the federal level can be bad. So talk about what those would be. And our textbook does talk about those things. So that's there. And then there are some people who don't think deficits are bad. So maybe you're one of those people, and there are macroeconomic reasons for having deficits. So there really are, like I mentioned in our last webinar, macroeconomics tends to be, unlike a business, it's more of a balancing act. So there's really no right direction all the time. You really have to balance between going too far in one direction or too far in the other direction. And I think deficits is one of those examples. So you could make an argument on either side depending on the conditions of the time, and using the theories presented in the book, in our textbook. So Jennifer asks, when fixing the policies, is there room for personal interpretations? Jennifer, do you mean in the agree, disagree section? Certainly in the agree, disagree section, there's room for personal interpretation. I mean, we do want you to give your personal interpretation. We want you to use some macroeconomic justification for your perspective. I hope that good. I'm glad, Jennifer. I hope that helps. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like most people have a favorite when it comes to macro or micro, and hopefully you don't just dislike them both. But even professional economists, they usually specialize in one or the other. So I'm in no surprise that students often feel the same way, that they find one much less fun than the other. Which is my favorite? I prefer teaching micro. I prefer reading and studying macro. So yeah, Dave, so the conclusion one is more just you're sort of reiterating what you've already reviewed, and the agree disagree is your thoughts on it. So they might talk about the same things, but this is your only, the agree disagree slide is the only time where you're going to talk about what you think about it. I hope that makes sense. I mean, you know, in this course and in macroeconomics in general, you know, because it's it can at times be very political, for lack of a better term. We did sort of want to give students the chance, the opportunity here to think a little bit about how they feel about all this, because you know we're citizens of an economy, and macroeconomy is, a lot of it is just based on things that are outside of the political realm, certainly. And hopefully you learned that in your research and in our textbook. But of course, policy does play a major role too, which we learned in our paper. So, you know, as constituents of our lawmakers, we do want you to come away from this class understanding the ways that policy impacts the economy, and have an opinion about that as a citizen. So this is your chance to be a good citizen and think about it from your own perspective, and use the tools that you got in this class, these macroeconomic understandings, to inform your perspective instead of just basing it on other reasons. So now you have a whole new toolbox to think about these things when you think about them, when you read a newspaper article, or when you think about a new law that's been passed or a new policy that's put in place. Thanks, Ellen. And Michelle, yes, I am feeling better. Oh, I'm very healthy. I thought I was going to come down with the flu again because my daughter was throwing up in the middle of the night the other night, but I think it was just food poisoning. Because the moms, we're the ones who have to help the kids when it comes to all the illnesses. So that's how you catch it, helping them. No offense, dads. I'm just kidding. I know dads help too. Oh no, Rebecca, that's awful. Yeah, that's what I had about, what was it? We had, so our milestone was 2 weeks ago? Yeah, 2 weeks ago we had strep. Oh, and 5 kids. Goodness. You beat me. Yes, Ellen. I have 3 boys. 3 of my 4 are boys, and they're still very young and mama's boys, and I'm sure that's going to change. My older son is 8, and he's already becoming very much the football fan so that he can spend more time with dad. So I already see it happening. All right. Well, enough about me. One other thing I really do want to point out before I let you guys go, now that we just have a couple minutes left, we've covered all the new stuff, but I want to pull up quickly, and hopefully I have it here. Let me grab it from the computer. What I want you all to do, hopefully you all have time after you've added these 4 slides, is to go through and read through the rubric for the final project. So you can make sure that you don't miss out on any points. Because, and I know I've mentioned this in other webinars, you're going to go from proficient being the 100% score, where that's gives you full credit, to exemplary. So you might need to make some improvements, even if you already were at the proficient level, which got you a perfect score on that element. You might still need to take it a step further. And here we go. We're not going to go through the whole rubric. That would definitely, that's good. That would take too long, and I'm sure all of you want to get working on your new slides when you do set aside some time to get working on this. But I just want to pull up the document so you can see. This is, of course, in your class. Hopefully you peeked at this in week 1, and you peeked at this to have in your mind as you did your milestones. But I'm just going to quickly scroll down to the rubric to show you guys, so you don't forget. So you notice proficient is here now, and it's 85% now. So if you got a score of proficient and you truly were at the proficient level for all the elements on all your milestones, you would have perfect scores so far. But if you don't have the stuff that matches up with exemplary, all those perfect scores become Bs, which is fine. Not everybody has to get a perfect score on every single element, but I do want to be super transparent with you guys, and I don't want anyone to be shocked at their grade because they forgot about this, certainly. So do go through each of these and see the difference between proficient and exemplary and what it's going to take to get to the exemplary level. The guide is designed to aim you towards the exemplary level, even though you were working on it in your milestones. So if you really knocked it out of the park by following the guide that we just went through, you might already be at the exemplary level, but do still go through each one of these and see how it compares to your work. Read through your instructor's feedback. Hopefully they gave you some pointers. If you were at proficient, but they know that you're not going to be at exemplary, they can give you some sort of pre-feedback to get you ready for the final. But the rubric really is your best source, because that's going to lay out very clearly for you what you need to do to get from proficient to exemplary. You'll notice that a lot of it is just sort of adding some additional detail to what you've got. Like for instance here, examination, GDP, influenced national output. So it says meets proficient criteria and offers a nuanced insight into the relationship between events and national output. So that has some subjectivity, right? People can interpret that a little bit differently. But really what it's just looking for is that you're going into a little bit more detail to explain how these things are related. So if you go to your to the work that you did on milestone 1 for this particular element, and you see that maybe it's just a little basic and a little it might be on the shorter side. Short isn't always bad, but if it's very brief and doesn't include a lot of detail or application of the things like the GDP model or anything like that, you can maybe go into a little bit more depth into what you've already got. It might not take a lot of extra work, but it would get you from the proficient to the exemplary category. And then a lot of the other ones, especially in the fiscal and monetary policy sections, if we zoom down there, you'll notice that a lot of them, to get exemplary, you need to use concrete examples to illustrate your claims, or to include research. So those are some things that you're going to want to look to add to make sure that you get exemplaries in those areas. So Dave, if you did not receive feedback from your instructor, first of all, I just to give your instructor the benefit of the doubt, because I haven't been in there and I don't want to assume anything. Do make sure that you checked the embedded rubric for comments within the embedded rubric. But if there aren't any comments within the embedded rubric, and you got proficient on everything, then what I would do is, again, look at the rubric, see if there's any gaps. And if you're unsure on any of your scores, if you need to do more work to get the exemplary level on any of the elements on any of the milestones, just email your instructor and say, okay, I got a proficient on all these elements, but what do I need to do to get to exemplary, or am I already there? Because a lot of students already are. I know that in my course, students who are following the project guide, a lot of times they like I said, they just really knock it out of the park, and they're already at the exemplary level, and I let them know to save them the stress of having to figure it out. You don't need to make any edits to this section for the final. You're good to go. If your instructor didn't do that for you, you can certainly email them and ask, and they can give you some additional guidance. So Jennifer, I'm not sure if that question is directed at me. So no, it looks like it's directed at Ellen. Okay, I'll let Dr. Sloss take care of that one, Jennifer. I'm going to make sure I didn't miss any other questions. Oh yes, and as Kate mentioned, do remember to convert it to a PDF with notes. This makes getting your grade back much faster, because we do need to read your. If you submit just as a PowerPoint to Blackboard, we can't read your notes section, which is where a lot of your stuff is. Especially a lot of the stuff that gets you from proficient to exemplary, like nuanced insight. You're not going to give nuanced insight a lot of the times on your slide, because your slide's not going to have the detailed stuff. That's going to be in the notes area. So we need to see that. And so the converting to a PDF with notes, and hopefully the video has been shared in all of your courses to show you how to do that. It's just a YouTube video that I've made and shared with all the faculty. That makes it so that your instructor can see both your slide and the notes area below, and give you all your hard-earned points. Okay, yeah, not all instructors. Some instructors are okay just downloading the paper, so they open it up. They have to download it basically to their computer, and then they read it separately, so it's not embedded in Blackboard. They'll just read it just like a PowerPoint, like as if you emailed it to them, and then they can see your notes. Some instructors are fine with that. It just speeds things up if it's done the way that I described, and it's very simple to do, but it's not intuitive, so you might not, if you've never had to do this to a PowerPoint file, you wouldn't know off the top of your head, which is why I created a video and shared it with instructors. For some instructors who, for them, it's not a problem to download the assignment, they probably didn't share it because for them, it's not a problem. Certainly for you, it's not a problem unless you feel like you're missing out on points, but I doubt that that's the case. Yeah, again, if you haven't done it before, that's probably because that's your instructor's preference, or they don't have a strong preference to see it in Blackboard. They just download it and read it that way. That might be very comfortable for them. So I can try to grab the video real quick and find my YouTube channel and get it for you guys. I think it's my most watched video. Let's see here. Ellen, that's my favorite video. It is very handy, I will say. I have so many videos now. And I've got friends and family who somehow get updates when I put up YouTube videos, like these webinars. Because I guess we're Google friends, which I never even use, but Google and YouTube are the same company or something now. They're linked, and so like my father will tell me whenever I post a YouTube video that he's watching them. Real riveting stuff. All right. Oh, here we go. I have found it. All right, let me get the URL for you guys, and I will pop it in the chat. Oh, Melissa, you're too fast. I'm the slowest of everyone. That's not surprising. Thank you, both Melissa and Ellen, for sharing it. For those of you watching at home, I know that you won't be able to see it in the chat, but if you go to my YouTube channel, which is I always forget what the actual name of my YouTube channel is. Ellen, you know what the name of my channel is. It just says my name, but I know that that's not the actual. It's Nicole G 1981. That's the name of my channel. So if you go to that YouTube channel, you can find all of these videos, including how to save a PowerPoint as a PDF. Or you could also email me. It's Nicole, n.soto@snhu.edu, or look in, or ask your instructor. But again, my YouTube channel, which has all of these videos and the video on how to convert the PowerPoint to a PDF, is the channel is called Nicole G 1981. I'm giving away my age, for better or worse. All right. Well, we're past time. So thanks to those of you who stuck around. So we could share that and answer that question. Yeah, if your instructor, doesn't require that, I don't want you to assume that you've been missing out on anything up until this point. But it definitely, I think any instructor would feel that it makes the grading faster, and make sure that they don't miss anything when it comes to hitting that exemplary mark. So it's extra important for the final. So if you're going to do it anywhere, do it here. All right, thank you guys all so much, and best of luck with those 4 new elements, and with any edits you need to make to stuff from the milestone. And again, as always, if you have questions, email your instructor as soon as possible so they can get back to you and give you plenty of time to get this submitted by Sunday.